All right, 8th grade. I want to talk through really quick what you should be working on for your outline to your essay so that you are prepared for your Wednesday asynchronous task. You should be working on this outline Tuesday asynchronously so that when you go to write Wednesday asynchronously, you have your ideas organized. So the first thing you'll need to do for your outline is figure out what it is that this essay is asking you to do. So for that, I'm going to be on the first page of the DBQ, and I'm going to look at the task, and I'm going to look at the questions in the box. So here it asks me to explain the causes and consequences of the War of 1812. So there, it's asking me for two things. Causes would be one. So I need to have information on what caused the War of 1812. And then consequences or effects. Consequences can be positive or negative, but what were the effects of the War of 1812? So that's a second topic. So I need to talk about causes, I need to talk about effects. And then the second bullet here says, analyze why it is often known as the Second War of Independence. So what I need to do is I need to look at that title, Second War of Independence. I need to consider what happened in the war, who we were fighting, why we were fighting, maybe look at some of those causes and see if I can explain why historians and why some of our founding fathers may view this war as a second war for independence. So, down on the outline, past all the documents, what I've provided for you is what should go in each paragraph. The more detail you put into this outline, the easier it should be to go from outline to essay. So in your introduction, you need a grabber. So that's something to hook your reader. So in language arts, I know they call it a hook. But it's something to get the attention of your reader and make them want to read more. Sometimes I like to leave this for last. It kind of depends how creative I'm feeling. But you might, so that Second War for Independence really kind of sticks out in my head. So I might include something about that in my grabber. So for the grabber, I'm going to include, or I'm going to note that this should be something interesting to make my reader want to know more. A hook. For your background, so this is going to be the meat of your introductory paragraph. It should be a few sentences, but you want to include only what is necessary for your reader to know. The War of 1812, they have entire courses on the War of 1812. People have written novels on the War of 1812. We need to keep it short, sweet, and to the point. So maybe thinking about who, what, when, where, and why. So we'll say short and sweet. Only what the reader needs to know. Who, what. Who, what, when, where, and why. So this next point is kind of interesting. Restating the question. So if you look, and actually our question's down here too, there's not really a question with a question mark. These are statements asking you to perform a task. They're not really asking you to answer a question, so to speak. So what I would do here is I would take these statements and sort of phrase them into a transition statement for your writing. So we've talked about the background, we've hooked your reader. Now we need to move them into understanding what you're going to talk about in the rest of this essay without saying, I'm going to tell you about. Because we've moved past that now. We're in 8th grade. So I need to explain the causes and consequences, and I need to talk about this title of the Second War of Independence. So for your restating the question, I might say something like, because of the British involvement and control of American soldiers, this war is sometimes called the Second War for Independence, or like the Revolutionary War, where America fought against the British to win their independence. The War of 1812 was another fight to secure their independence. I might explain how we weren't really declaring independence. We already had independence, but we were fighting to keep it, if that makes sense, because our American soldiers were being kidnapped. We weren't allowed to trade. We were independent, but we were still being controlled. Ooh, I like that. Maybe I would use that. So explain the U.S.-British relationship. Independent, but still being controlled. And then your thesis statement and statement of evidence. Again, this isn't a question where you're just going to answer the question because blank, blank, and blank. You need to talk about the causes, effects, and then why it's called the Second War of Independence. So I would try to think about my causes, think about my effects, and how can I summarize them up. So if all my causes are because of the British control, or the British trying to keep control of the colony or of the U.S., if that's what sent us to war, I might summarize it like that. So I might say something about British trying to control the U.S. Let me just write out a thesis. Because the British continued to try to control the U.S. The U.S. was forced, I'm going to make it sound really good, was forced to fight back and ultimately defend their newly earned independence in, what's another word for war? So I'm going to use my Google Docs tools. Let's see. Tussle, battle, skirmish, clash, engagement, affray. Vendetta, strife. What word do I want? I'll say clash. I like clash. In a clash that has been known as a second war for independence. So you can see, like, I'm not really answering a question per se, but I'm discussing causes, a little bit of the impact, and then kind of addressing how it might be considered a second war for independence without going into much detail, because that's what my paragraphs later are for. Now, I don't want you to use this exact thesis statement. It's not perfect. It's a little wordy, but it gives you an idea of what to put there. So for your body paragraphs, I see 3 main topics in the question, so those are going to be my 3 main body paragraphs. So body paragraph 1 is going to be causes of the war. Body paragraph 2 is going to be consequences or effects of the war. And then body paragraph 3 is all about that title, the Second War for Independence. Why it's called that and if it's accurate. So in each body paragraph, I'm not going to go through and explain what to put in every single one. I'm going to take one of these body paragraphs and walk you through it. So let's go over causes of the war, since it's first. So the first thing you need is a baby thesis. So that's like your introductory statement to this paragraph, where you're going to name or categorize the causes of the war. So if I'm going to say, in general, the war was caused by the British abusing their power. If that's how I'm going to summarize all the different things, the impressment, the blockade, and the battles at the Canadian border is all just Britain abusing its power or trying to overextend their power. That's going to be my thesis statement because that's how I'm going to summarize them all together. So the main cause of the War of 1812 was the British trying to overextend their power on the new United States. So then what you need next, and this is probably the hardest part, is your evidence. Your evidence is going to be something from a document that supports that. So what immediately comes to my mind is document 1, because that's where Madison was declaring war, and he's talking about the impressment or the capturing of American soldiers and forcing them to fight in the British Navy. So I might include something from document 1. So I'm going to put document 1 here. There are other documents that certainly talk about the causes. You need to pull a short quote that talks about impressment. And then once you have that quote, you need to connect that evidence to your thesis. So you can't just put that quote there and move on. You have to say something like, this shows or this explains. You need to tell me how that quote makes your point. So it's going to be things like, this shows ... or this explains ... And you'll need to do that for each piece of evidence you include. I would suggest having 2 pieces of evidence for body paragraph 1 and 2 for body paragraph 2. So I would try to have 2 pieces of evidence. And I'm going to download this as a PDF, and I'm going to send it to you guys on Frog Messenger so that you have my marked up copy while you're working. So once you've got 2 different quotes and an argument for each, you're ready to move on. You're going to do the same thing for the consequences. What were the effects of the war? How did it impact the United States? Summarize that up into a baby thesis. Give me 2 pieces of evidence. And then for each piece of evidence, you need to explain what that tells you. So when you pull that quote from the document, you have to tell me that it shows blah, 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 blah. Body paragraph 3 is a little different. So for body paragraph 3, you're more making the argument as to why this is considered the Second War for Independence. So that's going to be your baby thesis. It's going to be, why is this? So you'll need to answer that question. Why is this the Second War for Independence? What about this gives people that impression? Here, your evidence, if you have 2 in body paragraph 1 and 2 in body paragraph 2, you don't technically need an exact quote. You can kind of summarize what you've already talked about. So this is going to be more of a summary of what you already discussed. And then with that, you would have your argument of how your evidence makes this war like a second fight for independence. All right, so now we're down to your conclusion. Some people find this to be the hardest part. I think the body paragraphs are pretty difficult personally, but everybody's different. Some people just have trouble figuring out how to end their essay, right? So your concluding paragraph. One thing that is probably different from what you're used to is that we're going to start this by acknowledging the other side of the argument. So some people might argue that the War of 1812 wasn't a second war for independence. So we could say, although the U.S. had already won its independence from Britain in the Revolutionary War, but you need to somehow acknowledge the other side of the argument, because somebody who believes that what they say is true and no one else can possibly have any valid opinion is usually wrong. So the although statement shows that you can acknowledge the other side of this argument. So some people might argue that this isn't a second fight for independence, and that's fine. So we're going to use this although statement to acknowledge that there are people that might argue that. So we're going to acknowledge the other side. So I might say, although the U.S. won their independence in the Revolutionary War. I can't type today, I'm sorry. And then you need to restate your main idea. Blah, blah, blah. The British interaction with the U.S. during the War of 1812 made it like a second war for independence. So that's going to be how you start off your conclusion. And then to wrap up this essay, you need to address why this matters. What did this mean for our country? What did this mean for U.S. history? What did it prove? We talked a little bit about how this was the first real time America had stood up to basically what equates to bullies. It's the first time they kind of stood their ground. So they had the Revolutionary War. They had just declared their independence, but they had never had to defend it until now. So you're going to kind of use that thought to argue why this matters. Why is it important? What does it mean for history? So what does this all mean for history? And that's going to wrap up your essay. So remember, the better and more detail and more full sentences that you put here, the simpler and easier it will be to turn it into an essay. If you have enough detail here, you should just have to delete my prompts, delete my formatting, and make everything you have under each heading into a paragraph. So maybe reword some things, make it into a sentence, maybe fix some punctuation, maybe fix some spacing, delete these little prompts and headings. But if you do this well, and if you take your time, this will become your final essay, just by deleting each of these prompts for each of the paragraphs. So I hope this helps. Remember, I do have office hours on Wednesday for 8th grade from 1 to 1:30. Otherwise, I will see you on Thursday.